for all the craziness of all of this, Trump is an extraordinarily ineffective vehicle for harnessing the discontent and anger towards all of these processes. He did fairly well with it, I would say, just cynically watching him in 2016, but he was an unknown quantity then. And his incompetence to deal with, this unique crisis that we're in right now is, obviously I'm not going to make the same mistake of predicting again that he's gonna lose, but it's very possible that Biden's going to win. And even though the Democratic Party is intellectually, I think it's just completely broken. It doesn't stand for anything anymore except for not being something else. And even that doesn't stand for that all that strongly. It could still sputter on for a little while. And what I worry about is that it will succumb to the same institutional pressures that happen at Evergreen and have happened more recently at the New York Times. It's, it doesn't know, because it's not strong in its own identity, it's susceptible to being taken over by zealots. And I don't know how much you would worry about that, but I worry about that a little bit.
Oh, I think it's far worse than that. I think, yeah, this is becoming a theme, I guess. But the Democratic Party stands for nothing because it has become an influence peddling racket, as the Republican Party is. And as such, the only thing it does is protect its access to power. And what has happened is it has lost its argument for being awarded that power by voters. And what it is now going to do is it is going to rally a constituency by giving it something real. But what it's giving it is power over other citizens. In other words, and this is why I say it is George Bridges, right? Joe Biden is the George Bridges play, because what it's going to do is it's going to empower this counter-revolution that is now marching in our streets and marching in every single institution. It is going to empower them to keep them from going after the real culprits. So, the anger in the streets is about something real. Americans have been frozen out of a large fraction of the well-being that they've created. And in an effort to stave off the French Revolution yet one more election cycle, the people with the pitchforks and the torches are going to be awarded rights to extract stuff from other citizens. And that is I just don't even see how that will be avoided. It's not that the zealots will take over the Democratic Party. It's that the Democratic Party will foolishly empower them, will cynically empower them in order to win this election and potentially future ones. And that will be the final straw.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. I remember in 2016 watching, when Bernie was first becoming a thing, and it was surprising to see how well he was. I guess it wasn't surprising, because the Democrats their message is just so unsuccessful when they try to present it, unvarnished in front of audiences. It's just amazing the lack of response they get. So Bernie starts doing well, and one of the first things that starts happening is that the Clinton campaign starts dusting off the language of campus intersectionality to go after the Sanders movement, which I thought was fascinating because I had watched Hillary do exactly the opposite in 2008 when Barack Obama was the candidate. She was basically trying to run as George Wallace in places like Pennsylvania. Now they figured, because this is how they're wired, that, well, let's just go for whatever cynically will get us through the night. Bernie is vulnerable. We'll call him a cis white man. We'll get all of our aides to whisper in the ears of journalists at night. Hillary publicly says things like, yes, if we broke up the banks tomorrow, would that end racism? Which was an extraordinarily effective line because Bernie didn't know how to answer that for some reason. He was afraid of the connotation of answering that charge, and he backed off from it, and that became successful. And I think that's the seed. That was the seed of what you're talking about, where the trade for the Democrats became, all right, so to stop us from having to deal with offending all of our donors in the health insurance industry, in the military industrial complex, on Wall Street. I mean, this is our power base, right? And they transparently, if you talk to people in the party, they transparently see their job as finding the middle ground between getting elected and making sure that the donors are happy. And their donors are, not people, they're these big institutions. So they saw that the way forward was to start adopting the language of wokeness. I don't think at any level they ever believed it in any meaningful way. But they did it again this year, even, with Bernie again. But I think you're right. I think what they're going to end up doing is, rather than go forward with Medicare for all or any other kind of serious structural reform, or breaking up the banks on Wall Street, or any of the other things that people have been asking for, they are going to give them something. I think they're going to give them this institutional revolution that some people are asking for, which conveniently will exclude some of their biggest donors from impact for a while, and I think that's a good analysis that you have of the situation. It troubles me that we don't see that in the press very much when they're talking about what the Democrats are doing with this language. Why is Nancy Pelosi, dressing in kente cloth scarves, and they're participating and they're talking about knocking down all these statues, where only a few months ago they were denouncing Sanders on patriotic grounds as being a Russian agent. Like, they don't see the contradiction there. It's just, it's an odd thing. Yeah.
It's odd. It again reminds me of those people walking out to look at the fish flopping on the sea
right,
floor.
Yes, exactly. Well, that perfectly describes the Democrats in like a million ways.
In a million ways. Right, exactly. Yeah. And, of course, in 2020, that just puts us in such an amazing bind, because nothing stands between us and this revolution getting its every wish, which, I guess on the bright side, the fairy tales it's talking about aren't going to function. So it's not going to be long-term successful, but it can wreck everything in the process. And, not only are Americans depending on all of the things it's going to wreck, but the world is depending on us to keep it together. Because if we don't, I mean, look what we're doing to the international picture.
Yeah, that, and also I think another huge issue there is what happens when we don't get a fake Trump the next time? What happens when we get a real fascist in response, which for sure is going to happen if things continue in a certain direction, right? Because Trump, for all of his faults, and you could list them from now until tomorrow, he's everything that a lot of people have said about him. His personality is sufficiently disorganized and inward focused that he was never able to commit to any policy of any kind. He was not even, even when he brought in Steve Bannon, which I thought was a dangerous moment because it wedded an actual strategic mind to the political horsepower that Trump was capable of bringing. He just couldn't get along with that person for very long. Trump is he's so profoundly insecure in his relationships that he can't have any for any extended period of time. So it prevented him from doing a lot of the dangerous things that people predicted that he would do. But there's going to come a time when someone is going to try to get elected using the same formula that Trump used, but is going to be not a dummy and not a narcissistic, sort of psychologically disabled person. And, that's going to be a serious problem, right? Because there's all those people who are buying guns for the first time, they're going to be receptive to the message that comes from, the face in the crowd, Andy Griffith figure, who is inevitably going to rise from all this.
Oh, I exactly agree with this analysis that as troubling as Trump is, the fact that, he's a narcissist or the equivalent actually limits the damage, right? Because, his objective function is not to turn us into something else. He's not an organic fascist. He's selfish.
Right.
And so, yeah, this is coming. And it's like somehow we're having this incredibly foolish argument where people see that they don't want Trump. And of course, they are blinded by it. And, Trump derangement syndrome is real, right? And it is the entire argument for the Democratic Party winning at this point. It's not a good argument, but it's like quitting smoking, right? The argument against quitting smoking cannot be it's very, very hard to quit smoking because it's going to get harder, right?
Right. Yeah.
So, right. If Trump is the focus, it's the only thing you can see, then the answer is, well, now is the time we have to break out of this duopoly nonsense, because the next time it's going to be way worse. It's going to be the thing you said it was this time that it didn't turn out to be.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And if I could nerd out on the coverage of Trump for a minute, because this has bothered me a lot ever since he got elected. The storyline about Trump should have been the extraordinary black comedy that happened in 2016. Like, here was a guy who basically was not trying to win, who was running for a variety of reasons that were preposterous on like multiple levels, who was actively sabotaging himself multiple times throughout the campaign, and yet he wins anyway, right? Like, in other words, he's trying to lose, but America does not let him lose.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than focus on, my God, how could that possibly have happened? Like, what profound structural flaws in our system, what could possibly have disenchanted people so much that they would even override Trump's natural self-destructive urges to put him in office? Nobody did that analysis. They immediately went for this other thing, which was to portray Trump as something that he wasn't, which was this sort of otherworldly Hitlerian existential threat who was, any minute now going to be putting us all in concentration camps or surrendering us to Russia, which created this air of unreality around everything. And I think, like all sort of journalistic efforts to try to paint Trump in a bad light, they went too far, and ultimately did damage to their own cause in doing so. They discredited themselves by painting Trump as something that he isn't. Like, the entire argument for Donald Trump now is the best argument is that institutional America has lied about him, and if he ends up getting elected again, it'll be because of that. Anyway, it's a private thing that really, really bothers me about that whole narrative, is that they got him elected the first time, and they're going to do it again if it happens again.
Oh, I completely agree with this. To the extent that you have Trump derangement syndrome, you should be looking at the Democratic Party and saying, how could you have done this to us? And how could you possibly put us in danger of this again? Because there are actually two arguments for Trump now. One is that he has faced a conspiracy to eliminate him from office from day one, which is true. And I'm not saying that there was nothing to the impeachment. I think there was, but the point is they would have impeached him whether or not there was, right? It was impeachment first, and then let's find grounds. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, by delivering us Joe Biden as the alternative, Joe Biden in his enfeebled state, they have created another argument. A rational person could say, well, at the end of the day, I want somebody in the Oval Office who is capable of processing the information necessary to, let's say, avoid a nuclear conflict. I don't want it to be Trump because he could get us into a nuclear conflict. On the other hand, Joe Biden 2 years from now, as compared to Donald Trump 2 years from now, who is going to be more capable of integrating information, I can't say that I think it's Joe Biden. Maybe I can say that I think that he's going to step down, but then the point is, since when is electing a president really a means of getting a vice president into the presidency, this is party rule. So
Right.
I think that, I'm certainly not voting for Trump. I'm also not voting for Biden. But I can see now the Democrats have created arguments for voting for Trump, and that ought to tell us something is way off.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. If the pandemic hadn't happened, I would be betting a lot of money on Trump to win.
Oh yeah.
His inability to deal with this well, all of his worst qualities have come out here, and so that they're going to make the argument that Joe Biden is basically a corpse, and we all understand that, and that's why we're not going to put him on television at all if we can avoid it. But we're really electing the people behind him, and those people are going to be relatively sane, which is going to be a new thing for this country. At least for going back 4 years. So they're going to make that argument, but for a lot of people, for a lot of voters, they don't think that many levels down. They look at what the images they see on television, and Biden next to Trump, it doesn't look great, to the ordinary voter. So you're right. It's very frustrating that they've created this condition again.